It's that time of the year again. Spring training starts next week for the Cubs, and PECOTA finally dropped their 2026 projected rankings for the Cubs and the rest of the NL Central for this season. Let's break it all down and see what it really means for the Cubs. Let's first take a look at what PECOTA has the Cubs projected for this year and kind of compare and contrast it to what they have the Cubs projected for last year. So you can first see here that PECOTA has the Cubs projected at 89.7 wins with a 70% chance to win the division and an 83% chance to make the playoffs. Now, comparing that to last year, they had the Cubs at 90.6 projected wins with a almost 80% chance to win the division and an 87% chance to make the playoffs. So what kind of leads into this slight decline in the numbers? And let's kind of compare it with what the Brewers are looking like as well for the 2026 season. So looking at Milwaukee, you can see this season they're projected at roughly 80.7, about 81 wins. Now looking at last year, that was about the same number they had at about 80 wins. Now if you think back to last year, the Brewers actually won the most games in all of baseball last year, a pretty impressive feat. So why wouldn't the projection be a little bit higher, don't you think? Well, the truth is Milwaukee doesn't look good on paper any year, but they find a way to win. So this gives them only a 32% chance to make the playoffs this year, and a 12% chance to win the division. Now, looking back to last year, they were projected at 9% chance to win the division and a 26% chance to make the playoffs. So if I was the Cubs or a Cubs fan like I am, I wouldn't even bat my eye for a second at the fact the Brewers could easily be in the race again this year, no matter who is on that team. So looking at it again, why do we think the Cubs actually had a slight drop in their number projections for PECOTA this year? Let's kind of dive into the roster and what we can expect from each player and kind of compare and contrast it to what we saw last year for the Cubs. So the way we're going to kind of go about this is looking at the projections for the top players at each position for WAR last year preseason and this year preseason from Steamers from Fangraphs, which is one of the most respected preseason analytical models that exists out there right now. So you can actually see when taking a look at the preseason projections from last year to this year, the Cubs actually have a net gain of about 2 wins above replacement than they did from last year's position player roster. Now, obviously, with any form of projections, there's going to be levels of variance in there, and that's to be expected and should be expected in the Cubs' preseason projections this year. But let's look back at last year and see which one of these players actually overperformed, underperformed, and what we can kind of gain from that and look forward to this upcoming year. So taking a retrospective look back at last year for the Cubs and seeing their actual WAR versus their preseason WAR, you see a pretty big trend here for the Cubs. Every player outperformed their preseason WAR. This is not very common. In fact, it's kind of an exception, not the actual trend. So looking at it here, you can see that Nico Horner was among the guys who had the biggest leaps above his projected WAR, as well as PCA there. Important thing to note here that even though the Cubs had a gross overproduction from their starting lineup in terms of WAR than their projected WAR from Steamers, they actually only netted 2 more wins than the PECOTA projections gave them preseason. And that's despite having an over 20 wins above replacement advantage over the preseason projections from Steamers last year. As you can see, the Cubs' actual lineup contributed 39.2 wins above replacement last season compared to their projected 19.5. So why did the Cubs only net 2 wins from this? Obviously, they weren't going to net 20 wins, but why only 2? Well, when you look at the Cubs' starting rotation last year, they were projected 10.5 WAR among their starting 5. Now, obviously, with the injury to Steele, that kind of hampered them there, but I used Colin Ray's numbers to kind of fit in there. So you see that the actual starting lineup only attributed 4.3 wins above replacement compared to their projected 10.5. That number seemed a little bit more even there when you even those out. Now, you could count in Kate Hortons here, and the numbers would be a little bit closer, but I didn't think that was fair to combine 2 players into 1 for this. Now, let's play a game here and see how we can tie this in to the 2026 Cubs and their projected WAR. Let's go player by player here and see if we think they can overperform or underperform and what we kind of think their probability is here, both in the starting lineup and the starting 5 for the pitching rotation. Now, before we do jump fully in to the projected WAR for the Cubs this season by player, I just want to state that the Cubs position players had a 201% leap in their projected WAR versus actual WAR last season, while the starting pitching only accomplished 41% of their projected WAR. If the Cubs were to keep this same pace this year, the Cubs offense would actually hit 43 wins above replacement with only 3.6 wins above replacement coming from pitching. Obviously, these numbers are not going to be exact, but I just thought that was interesting to note. Now, let's break down the players. So starting us off here, we're going to take a look at Alex Bregman here, who we can see is projected at 3.8 WAR for this upcoming season. Now, looking back at Bregman last year, we all know he had a pretty good year, hence the 5-year contract the Cubs handed him this offseason. Bregman put up 3.5 WAR last year, playing in 114 games. So assuming Bregman at full health, 3.8 WAR would have been easily in reach last year and could very well be in reach this year, especially in kind of a new ballpark, new team for him. Bregman throughout his career has been a +4 WAR guy almost every single year that he's been clean of injuries. I think it's very easy to expect this year for the Cubs. I'm going to give Bregman a 75% chance of hitting over on this WAR for him this year. Moving down the list here, we next look at PECOTA Armstrong, who had one of the best first halves of a season I think many of us have ever seen. He also ended up putting up 6 WAR throughout the year last year, which was quite a bit higher than his projected 2.1 WAR last year. It's pretty safe to say PCA is going to be right around a 4 WAR player every single year of his career, really just based off the defense and the pop we saw last year. Assuming he can kind of dial in some of his swing and miss concerns, which granted is a bit of a big ask since later in the season he had a huge problem reverting back to his old self, missing on a lot of easy pitches and just chasing out of the zone way more than he was in that first half of the year. Now, PCA at 3.5 WAR with his 6.0 WAR season last year kind of seems like an easy over here, and I'm going to be honest, I have to give it to Pete here. I don't think he's going to repeat with 30-plus home runs, but I think he'll comfortably be in that 20-25 range, as well as 30 to 40 stolen bases, and probably the best outfield defense in all of baseball, which, by the way, he was robbed of that Platinum Glove this year. So now we're going to take a look here at Nico Hoerner, who, in my opinion, is my favorite player to watch day in and day out. I believe he just does everything kind of right on the baseball field, and hence why his WAR last year was a staggering team-leading 6.2 wins above replacement. And after that year, he comes into this year with a projection of only 3.4 wins above replacement. And not to sound like a homer here, but I have to take the over on Nico here again. 3.4 WAR seems very low for Nico considering he had put up a 6.2 WAR last year and played in 157 games. The only reason I could see him going under is if he wasn't able to match that same game total, which he does have some sort of injury history to him, so it wouldn't be the most shocking thing. But like I said, he played in 157 games. He was healthy pretty much all year last year, and knock on wood, that should continue this year, and 3.4 seems like a low number for Nico, who's always in the right counts, always coming through in the clutch situations, and playing maybe the best defense at second base in all of baseball. To me, Nico is an easy over here, and I don't think it's even going to be a close competition to 3.4 WAR. I think he's a +5 WAR guy in most of his seasons. Next up here is Dansby Swanson, who we see projected at 2.7 WAR this season compared to his 4.5 WAR season he put up last year. I could see Dansby being closer to that 2.7 than he was that 4.5 last year, but I think somewhere in that middle ground is actually the right spot for him. Dansby is going to play a good amount of games every year. He's going to somehow get you 20 homers, even though it feels like he goes through some really bad stretches and some really good stretches. He always ends up with about 20 homers, about a middle of the pack batting average, and obviously unreal defense at shortstop, which he did have some hiccups, but at the end of the year, again in that Padres series, especially in the playoffs, he was undoubtedly our best defensive player and won us, honestly, that series just with his glove. I could see Dansby being right around a low 3 WAR. I do think 2.7 is a little bit low for Dansby because every year we've seen him, he's a 4+ WAR guy almost every single year without question. His defense alone kind of carries that, and I don't think his pop is really anywhere from going out. Even though he may struggle with putting bat on ball sometimes, his power has not really had any problems being here as a Cub. I'm going to give Dansby a slight up, but I think he's going to be right around that 3 to 3.5 WAR player this year. Now, here is a really interesting one here with Seiya Suzuki. Last year, Seiya actually put up 2.6 WAR, and that was mainly just as a DH. Now, obviously, with Tucker being hurt, he did play a decent amount of right field, but that's also why his projection last year was so low at 1.6. He's obviously a better player than a 1.6 WAR player, but last year he was only a DH. It's hard to get too much WAR when you're not playing on the defensive side of the ball. So this year he comes into the year projected at 2.3 WAR, which seems a little bit more respectable, especially compared to his 2.6 WAR last year, considering he was one of the best hitters in baseball over the first half of the year last year, as was most of this team, and then he actually cooled off in the second half, as has kind of been the Cubs' story the last couple of years. Now, I do like Suzuki here to go a little bit over. I could kind of see him right around, again, that 3 WAR player. Not to pick everybody to overperform projections, but it happened last year. Why couldn't it happen this year? I think Seiya is closer to a 3.5 WAR player, kind of similar to Dansby. It just kind of depends on that defense. That bat is going to get you right around 2 WAR every single year, and it's kind of where is that defense kind of playing in for him. I think Seiya is a little bit over here, right around that 3 WAR player. His defense is never going to be spectacular, but I do believe his offense is good enough to carry him to right around a 3 WAR season. You can't talk about projections with the Cubs without talking about maybe their most polarizing player in Ian Happ. Half the fans love him, half the fans hate him. I think Ian has been here for a long time and done things right. He's always been a very respectable player for the Cubs. Last year, he put up a 4 WAR season. Despite his defense maybe not looking beautiful out there all the time, he has won, 3 or 4 Gold Gloves now. So even though that kind of left field position is weak defensively, he seems to be the cream of the crop there. Whether or not I respect Gold Gloves is a discussion for a different day. But him being projected at 2.2 WAR seems incredibly low for me, especially because I don't believe he's going to have much competition out there. He never really does. He's going to play quite a bit of games. Like last year, he played 150 games. I could see that being par for the course once again this year. I think Happ's going to be closer to a 3 WAR player because of his defense and his bat. He's always going to have a little bit of pop in that bat, and it comes in bunches. When Ian Happ gets hot, he's always one of the hottest players in baseball. And despite all the bad talk Ian Happ gets among fans, he's always going to produce right around the same every single year. I think he's an easy over as well at right around a 3.5 WAR player. Now, here's my biggest quibble with Steamer's projections this year. Michael Busch at 2.1 WAR feels like a slap in the face. If you think back to last year, Michael Busch played 155 games and put up 4.6 WAR. And mind you, a lot of these games he was playing was actually a pinch hit late in the game in the 7th inning because Justin Turner or John Birdie or somebody who didn't deserve to be playing was playing over him because we were scared of him facing a lefty. Now, think to that playoff run the Cubs went on last year, and think about who their best player was the entire time. It was Michael Busch, and it was without a question. Now, I've seen the talk on Twitter recently, is he a top 10 first baseman? I think that's a ludicrous question. I think Michael Busch is an easy top 10 first baseman. The discussion kind of starts for me, is he a top 5 first baseman? This year, I think Michael Busch is going to go out there and prove that in spades that he's easily a top 10 first baseman and in that top 5 discussion comfortably. I think 2.1 WAR is incredibly low. If there were odds on this, I would throw the mortgage on it. I think Michael Busch is an easily plus 3 WAR player, and could easily creep up way amongst that 4 WAR. He was almost a 5 WAR player last year. His glove is one of the best in the league. Every single year he seems to get better defensively at first, and then his bat is just loaded with power. Last year he hit 34 home runs. I don't think that's an anomaly. I think Michael Busch is an easy 30 plus, going to be pushing 40 home run guy a year, especially as he gets better facing left-handed pitching, as hopefully he has more exposure to that this year. Michael Busch is an easy over, and I think a big miss by Steamers here going into the year. Now, Carson Kelly is kind of an interesting one. I don't want to go ahead and put everybody over projecting their WAR this year, and I think Carson Kelly might be kind of the one I stop at. Carson Kelly is projected at 1.6 WAR, which is basically the exact same he was last year at 1.5 WAR, and he actually put up a 3.6 WAR season and was one of the Cubs' best bats, at times in the year, and especially in the playoffs, he actually had some big hits as well. I think Carson Kelly is a good catcher, but it's more going to be a combination of him, Miguel Amaya, and wherever you want to slot Moises Ballesteros in there, if that's at DH, if that is catching, wherever you want to slot him in there. I think their combined WAR will be over that 1.6 pretty comfortably, but Carson Kelly himself, I could see him kind of splitting up playing time a lot more this year, where I think 1.6 might actually be a little bit high for Carson Kelly. I'm going to kind of put him right around that 1.6, 1.7 number, kind of depending on how much playing time he gets compared to Moises Ballesteros and Miguel Amaya. So now let's kind of take a look here at the Cubs pitching staff, which, as we previously mentioned, way underperformed in the WAR department last year with a projected 10.5 WAR, only finishing the year with 4.3 WAR. So let's kind of look at the starting 5 here, and I have a few thoughts and comments on this. So starting off here, Matthew Boyd projected at 2.2 WAR this year, which is about a half game better than last year at about 1.7 WAR. And Matthew Boyd was really, really good for the Cubs last year. All year long, he was an all-star, one of the best pitchers in baseball, in my opinion. At the end of the year, he did kind of get tired down, especially in that Brewers series. He was kind of easy to hit, and we really relied on him heavily. I think a full offseason for him The biggest thing with him has always been kind of health. Can he stay healthy? He was healthy all year last year. He made 31 starts last year, which to my knowledge is a career high for him. Assuming he's able to stay healthy again this year, with putting up 2.5 WAR this last year, I do think 2.2 is a pretty comfortable estimate for him, considering last year was probably the best year of his career. I think 2.2 to 2.5 is a pretty safe spot for Matthew Boyd. I think Steamers is pretty spot on there. Moving down the list, we have one of our biggest jumpers in the negative direction on the team. Actually, I believe our biggest here, at Shota Imanaga, who was projected at 3 WAR in 2025, ended up putting about a 1.5 WAR season up, and now is projected for about 1.9. I think that's pretty fair for Shota. He was kind of a mixed bag last year, but mostly bad. We've always known Shota to be kind of a fly ball pitcher, and he's always been creative enough to get out of that, but last year that ball was staying up for way too long in the zone, and he was giving up more home runs than he really should have been, giving up 31 home runs, which was comfortably the most on the team last year. 1.9 WAR feels like a pretty good number for Shota because despite ups and downs last year, he was still able to put up a 1.5 WAR season, and it's not ludicrous to expect Shota Imanaga to put up a slightly better season than last year, which would easily comfortably put him in that about a 2 WAR player. Again, I think they're pretty spot on there with Shota. I'd put him right around 1.8 to 2 WAR. At 1.9 feels like honestly the right number for him. What Ian Happ is to fans on the offensive side of the ball, I think Jameson Taillon is on the pitching side of the ball. Jameson Taillon's always one of those guys that no matter who you are, who you talk to, somebody's going to have a different opinion on him. He's really good, he's really bad, he's kind of average. I think Taillon's about an average to maybe a little bit better at his best, but when he is bad, obviously he's pretty bad. Last year, he put up a 1.3 WAR season and a 3.6 ERA over the season. He was actually one of the Cubs' more dependable guys going into the postseason, and honestly had a really good start in the postseason as well. He's projected right around 1.6 wins above replacement, and I honestly think that's a pretty fair number, as are many of these pitching numbers for the Cubs. Taillon's kind of a mixed bag when he's really on, and when he goes through those really good spurts when he's really on, he's an unbelievable pitcher and could easily surpass about a game and a half WAR on a season-long basis. But the thing is, that's usually like a month for him, and he goes through those months or so where he is just giving up home run all the time. He was pretty comfortably second in home runs last year for the Cubs, giving up 24 home runs, only second to, of course, Shota Imanaga, as we previously talked about. I think Taillon's going to project right around a game and a half. I think it's a pretty fair number for him. It just kind of depends on what Jameson Taillon we get for the majority of this season next year. Now, for the last starting pitcher here, I chose to do Cade Horton over Justin Steele, although Justin Steele did have like 1.3 wins above replacement to Cade Horton's 1.2. I think Cade's the bigger story here and someone I want to talk about personally. So, despite Cade Horton only making 22 starts last year, he actually had 2 WAR in the season, which is only behind Matthew Boyd for the Cubs team lead. Cade Horton was my favorite pitcher to watch on the Cubs, bar none last year. I made sure I didn't miss a single Cade Horton start for the entire year. He was so fun to watch, the way he attacked the zone. He got better over the year. It was really great. He stayed healthy the whole year. It was so fun to watch. 1.2 WAR seems to me like they're projecting quite a big sophomore slump. As I said, 22 starts last year, 2 WAR for Cade Horton. They're projecting 1.2 over the entire season. I think he's an easy over. Obviously, it's dependent on health, but I think his stuff will play at the major league level for a long time. I think it's an easy over. Now, in terms of Justin Steele, since we didn't see Justin Steele much last year, I chose to leave him off this list, even though he was projected for slightly more WAR than Cade Horton. If Steele's healthy, he's a no-brainer to go over 1.3 WAR. We just don't know when we're going to see Justin back fully, and what he's going to look like when he's fully back from, obviously, a big surgery this offseason or last season. If Justin Steele's back, this starting rotation gets deep instantly, and it's actually really a fun one to watch over the year to see if they kind of manage a 6-man rotation or if they kind of stay in a 5-man rotation, who the odd man out kind of ends up being. So the Cubs do have a few wild cards in their pitching staff, as is any team, but I think one of their biggest is going to be Edward Cabrera. Cabrera was the Cubs' big trade acquisition this offseason, trading Owen Casey over to the Marlins to pick up Edward Cabrera. So Edward Cabrera is projected for roughly 2 wins this year, wins above replacement this year for the Cubs, according to Steamers. So last year he put up 2.8 WAR on the Marlins last year, which was pretty comfortably his best season of his career. Now the thing similar to Boyd with Cabrera is, can he stay healthy? When Cabrera's healthy, he's one of the more entertaining pitchers in baseball with that fastball and that unbelievable changeup that gets up to like 95, 96 miles an hour. It's unreal. So I think if Eric Cabrera is able to stay healthy, I know there's some questions with his UCL. If he's able to stay healthy, I think 1.9 is a pretty low number for him. It all just kind of depends on his health. I'm going to give him right around about a 2.5 win season if I were to be projecting this. I think they're a little bit low on him. Assuming a full season, I think he's right around that 2.5 mark for the Cubs this year. So let's kind of try to tie all those numbers I just threw at you all back together here to look back at those PECOTA rankings for the Cubs this year. So as we know, the Cubs were a slight decline, a very slight decline, about a game decline in projected wins this year for PECOTA. Now, looking at the numbers and everything that we just looked at, I don't really see where that slight change comes from. If anything, I think the pitching staff may be a bump better, getting some better arms back with that trade of Eric Cabrera, and they reinforced that bullpen over the offseason. I don't see how that pitching staff could get worse from last year, barring some unforeseen injuries, which are always a possibility, and that's obviously factored into their projections a little bit. For the offensive side of the ball, now it is interesting to look at how much the Cubs overperformed their projections last year, and to see that PECOTA kind of stayed within those projections for this year means their models must predict the Cubs worse than they were last year, and maybe a little bit lucky last year over the whole season. Now, I do think that's fair since the Cubs' beginning part of the season, that first half of the season was so good and that second half was so bad. But I do think that's kind of just what the Cubs have been the last couple of years, and obviously I hope they're able to kind of prolong their success over the season. And the biggest thing for the Cubs really is to not just have every single player slumping at once. That was kind of what Kyle Tucker was brought here to do last year, and to be honest, he kind of failed. He would go through slumps all the time with people, with other players with PCA, whether it be anybody on the team. They would all go in slumps kind of at the same time, and it's kind of been their problem for years. I do think Alex Bregman is going to bring a great piece of leadership to this team that will maybe make it so they don't go in those big slumps for a prolonged amount of time. But I think if the Cubs stay the course of what I believe they're going to be and what these projections are kind of saying right now, I think they're going to overperform this projection that PECOTA is giving them. I go to the Cubs right around that 92 win total again, right around 92, 93 wins. I think PECOTA is a little bit undershooting the Cubs for this one, and I think we'll have to kind of see, but I'm really excited for the season. Spring training starts next week for the Cubs. If you like this video, I'll be making videos like this very often covering the Bears, the Bulls, and the Cubs. So if you like this video, make sure to leave a subscription down below. Leave any comments if you have any thoughts on who you think is going to overperform, underperform, and what you thought of the video overall. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you guys next time.